How dare you speak to me that way? Do you have any idea who I am?" Every head in the glittering expanse of Spago, Beverly Hills, turned at once, a synchronized ballet of shock and curiosity. The low hum of expensive conversations and the delicate clinking of crystal died instantly, creating a vacuum of silence that was more jarring than any shout. All eyes landed on the furious blonde woman, her body rigid with indignation, towering over a table where a young black woman sat alone in a simple navy dress. Patricia Hartwell's manicured finger, tipped with a blood-red nail, pointed accusingly, her voice dripping with a venomous entitlement that had been cultivated over a lifetime of privilege. "I will not be insulted by some cheap, classless nobody." Her hand, adorned with a diamond bracelet that cost more than a modest family car, flew through the air with vicious speed. Slap. The sound echoed through the cavernous dining room like a gunshot. It was a sharp, ugly crack that severed the last thread of civility. Some diners gasped, hands flying to their mouths. Others, with the reflexive instinct of the modern age, fumbled for their phones, their screens lighting up to capture the unfolding drama. "Who is she?" someone whispered from a nearby table, their voice a mixture of pity and disdain. "Probably lost or something." Nervous, inappropriate laughter rippled through a small section of the room, but Celeste Williams didn't flinch. She didn't cry out. She simply sat there, her cheek blazing with a fire that seemed to spread through every nerve in her body. In that single, crystalline moment of impact, Patricia Hartwell had just made the biggest, most catastrophic mistake of her life, a mistake that would detonate her entire world in the next 60 seconds. If you are already on the edge of your seat, you're in the right place. Smash that subscribe button, give this video a thumbs up, and drop a comment telling us where you're watching from. Your support helps us bring more powerful stories just like this one to light. And trust me, you won't want to miss what happens next. "Did you just put your hands on my wife? My wife?" Now, let's go back to where it all began. The late afternoon sun of October 15th, 2024, filtered through the towering Palladian windows of the Bel Air mansion, casting long golden fingers across the cool marble floors of the master bedroom. The light illuminated dust motes dancing in the air like tiny, silent witnesses. Celeste Williams stood before her cavernous walk-in closet, a space larger than the entire first apartment she had rented on her own. Her fingers, long and graceful, drifted along a row of designer dresses, the silks and satins feeling foreign and slick beneath her touch. At 28, she possessed an understated, luminous beauty that needed no enhancement. Her warm brown skin seemed to glow from within, a stark, lovely contrast to the sterile opulence of the room. Her expressive dark eyes, framed by naturally long lashes, held a depth that hinted at a life lived with more substance than style. It was her gentle smile, a smile that radiated genuine warmth, that had first captured her husband's heart 3 years ago. "This one feels right," she murmured to herself, her voice a soft counterpoint to the ticking of a ridiculously ornate grandfather clock in the hallway. She pulled the modest, knee-length dress from its hanger. The fabric was a quality navy cotton, well-tailored but utterly unpretentious, exactly the kind of clothing that made her feel most like herself. It was a silent rebellion against the world she now inhabited. From the adjoining master bathroom, a space of chrome and steam and Italian marble, came the sound of running water as Adrian Williams finished his shower. At 35, Adrian commanded attention without ever demanding it. He was 6 feet 2 inches of confident presence, with the kind of sharp, penetrating intelligence in his green eyes that had allowed him to build a tech empire, Nexus Innovations, from a college dorm room idea into a $2 billion behemoth that had revolutionized cloud computing. But right now, His mind wasn't on server farms or stock prices. It was focused entirely on the evening ahead, an evening meant to be a quiet celebration of the anniversary of their first date. "Celeste, darling, are you ready?" Adrian's voice carried from the bathroom, warm and rich, with the slight Boston accent that always emerged when he was relaxed and happy. "Our reservation at Spago is at 7:30. Celeste glanced at the digital clock on her nightstand. 6:45 p.m. She slipped into the navy dress, appreciating the familiar comfort, the way the fabric moved naturally with her body instead of constraining it. As she fastened a simple silver necklace Adrian had given her for their second anniversary, a delicate chain with a single, perfect pearl, she caught her reflection in the full-length mirror. The woman looking back at her seemed caught between two worlds, a ghost of the girl who had grown up in a tiny, cramped apartment in Detroit, superimposed over the image of the wife of one of America's wealthiest men. The dissonance was a constant, low-level hum in the back of her mind. Adrian emerged from the bathroom, a cloud of expensive-smelling steam following him. He was adjusting his charcoal-gray Tom Ford suit jacket, looking every inch the successful, powerful man he was, from his perfectly styled dark hair to his polished Italian leather shoes. When his eyes landed on Celeste, his expression shifted, just for a fraction of a second. It was a flicker of love, mixed with a gentle, familiar concern. "You look beautiful," he said, crossing the vast expanse of the room to where she stood. His hands found her waist, his touch both proprietary and tender as he pulled her close. "You always do." Celeste heard the unspoken "but" in his tone. It was a silent passenger in so many of their conversations. They'd had this discussion before, always gently, always cushioned with love, but it lingered between them like the morning fog over the Santa Monica Mountains. "I know what you're thinking," she said softly, her hands automatically moving to straighten his tie, even though it was already perfect. It was a gesture of affection, a way to bridge the small gap that had opened between them. "You want me to wear the Valentino dress, the red one?" Adrian's thumb traced a slow, soft line along her cheek. "I want you to wear whatever makes you happy, Celeste, whatever makes you feel like you." He paused, choosing his words with the same care he used when negotiating a multi-million-dollar deal. "It's just, Spago attracts a certain crowd, a certain mindset. People judge first and ask questions later. I don't want anyone to treat you poorly because they don't understand who you are." Celeste's heart did a familiar, painful clench. This was the eternal struggle of their marriage, the central conflict in the beautiful fairy tale her life had become. Adrian's powerful, overwhelming protective instincts were constantly at war with her desperate need to remain true to herself, to the woman she had been long before the private jets and charity galas. She understood his concern on an intellectual level. In their world of obscene wealth and performative status, appearance often mattered more than substance. But the thought of transforming herself into one of the glossy, interchangeable women she saw at his business dinners, draped in labels and dripping with jewels, felt like a betrayal of the very woman he'd fallen in love with. "I'll change," she said quietly, her voice devoid of emotion as she turned toward the closet. It was easier to give in than to have the same conversation again, but Adrian caught her hand, his grip firm but tender. "No." His voice was soft, but left no room for argument. "I fell in love with the woman who wore a $15 dress from a thrift store to our first coffee date and made it look like it was worth $1 million. I fell in love with you, Celeste. Don't change for anyone, not even for me." The memory brought a genuine smile to both their faces, dispelling the tension in the room. That crisp autumn day 3 years ago, when they'd met at a small, unassuming cafe in Westwood, seemed like a lifetime ago. Celeste had been a literacy coordinator for an underfunded non-profit, passionately working with underprivileged children, barely scraping by on her salary, but rich in a sense of purpose that Adrian, surrounded by wealth, had found intoxicating. He, taking a rare afternoon break from his demanding schedule, had been immediately drawn to her fiery, intelligent discussion about educational inequality with a bored-looking barista. "Are you sure?" Celeste asked, searching his green eyes for any sign of doubt. "I'm sure," Adrian said, sealing his words with a soft kiss on her forehead. "You're perfect exactly as you are. Never forget that." 20 minutes later, they were seated in Adrian's midnight blue Bentley, the engine a low, contented purr as they glided through the perfectly manicured, tree-lined streets of Beverly Hills. The October evening was warm, typical of Southern California's stubborn resistance to the changing seasons. Celeste watched the elegant shops and impossibly exclusive restaurants pass by in a blur of warm light and polished brass. Each storefront seemed to whisper a secret language of wealth she still didn't fully understand. "Nervous?" Adrian asked, his perception as sharp as ever as he noticed her quiet demeanor. "A little," she admitted, her voice small. "I always feel like I'm wearing a costume in places like this, like I'm a kid playing dress-up in my mom's clothes." Adrian reached across the wide center console to take her hand, his fingers lacing through hers. "You belong everywhere I belong, Celeste. Everywhere. Don't you ever let anyone make you feel otherwise." His words were meant to comfort, to be a shield against the judgments of the outside world. But as the Bentley pulled up to the understated entrance of Spago Beverly Hills, a place renowned as a haven for Hollywood's elite and the city's old money, Celeste couldn't shake the premonition that tonight, that belief would be tested in the cruelest way imaginable. The valet opened her door with practiced, almost invisible efficiency, and Celeste stepped onto the sidewalk in her comfortable flats and simple navy dress. All around them, other patrons were arriving in a parade of luxury vehicles: Ferraris, Rolls-Royces, Bentleys. The women were draped in designer gowns that shimmered under the restaurant's warm lighting, their necks and wrists glittering with jewelry that could likely fund her old non-profit for a decade. For a moment, Celeste felt a wave of intense self-consciousness wash over her. "Mr. and Mrs. Williams, welcome." The maitre d' greeted them warmly as they entered, his smile genuine. Adrian was a regular here, a valued customer. "Your usual table is ready." The dining room buzzed with the low murmur of power and influence, the gentle clink of fine crystal, and the scent of expensive perfume and even more expensive food. Celeste followed Adrian to their secluded corner table, acutely aware of the subtle glances from other diners. Some looks were merely curious, others were openly dismissive. She had learned to read these micro-expressions over the years, the way people's eyes would slide over her simple appearance, register her as insignificant, and then focus entirely on Adrian, the obvious source of power. "Relax," Adrian whispered, as they settled into their plush seats. He leaned across the table, his eyes crinkling at the corners. "You're the most beautiful woman in this room, and more importantly, you're the kindest. That's a currency they don't understand here." Before Celeste could respond, Adrian's phone buzzed on the table with an urgent, insistent vibration. He glanced at the screen, and a deep frown creased his brow. "Damn it, it's the Tokyo office," he said, his voice laced with apology. "The Yamamoto deal. There's been a complication. I have to take this." Celeste nodded, her disappointment masked by a practiced understanding. Even on their sacred date nights, the responsibilities of being a CEO sometimes intruded. It was the price of their life. "Go ahead," she said, forcing a smile. "I'll be fine. 5 minutes, I promise." Adrian stood, leaning down to kiss the top of her head before stepping toward the restaurant's quieter bar area to take his call. Left alone, Celeste sipped her water and tried to absorb the elegant scene around her. The soft, amber lighting cast everything in a warm, flattering glow, and the quiet, confident conversations created an atmosphere of refined intimacy. She was just beginning to relax, just starting to feel like she might actually belong, when she noticed a woman at a nearby table staring at her with undisguised reptilian hostility. The woman was perhaps 45, with professionally coiffed blonde hair that looked as rigid as a helmet, and the kind of sharp-featured, stretched skin beauty that suggested extensive and expensive cosmetic enhancement. She wore a pristine white designer dress that probably cost more than Celeste's first car, and her jewelry caught the light with every disapproving gesture she made to her dinner companions. "What do you think you're looking at?" The question formed in Celeste's mind, a flicker of her Detroit-bred defensiveness, but she quickly pushed it away. She was being paranoid. The woman was probably looking at a painting on the wall behind her, or perhaps admiring the floral arrangement. But as the minutes ticked by and Adrian's 5-minute call stretched into 10, then 15, Celeste became increasingly, uncomfortably aware of the woman's persistent, laser-focused attention. Finally, with a sigh of theatrical exasperation, the blonde woman excused herself from her table. She began walking directly towards Celeste. Celeste's heart rate quickened, a frantic bird beating against her ribs. Something in the woman's expression, a toxic cocktail of disgust, boredom, and self-righteous anger, made her stomach tighten with a familiar, sickening dread. She'd seen that look before, on the faces of teachers who assumed she was trouble, on shopkeepers who followed her through the aisles. It was a look that had haunted her childhood in Detroit, and it never, ever led anywhere good. The woman was now standing beside Celeste's table, her cold blue eyes scanning Celeste from head to toe with the kind of obvious disdain one might reserve for a piece of filth on the sidewalk. The air crackled with her silent judgment. When she finally spoke, her voice carried the practiced, condescending authority of someone who had never been told no in her life. "Excuse me," she said, her tone dripping with a false, syrupy politeness that was more insulting than any overt slur. "But I think there's been some kind of mistake." Celeste looked up at the woman, her heart now hammering a frantic rhythm against her ribs. The woman radiated a hostility so palpable it was like heat rising from asphalt on a blistering summer day. Celeste could smell her expensive, cloying perfume, something heavy with gardenias, mixed with a sharper, more acrid scent, the unmistakable stench of prejudice and entitlement. "I'm sorry," Celeste said, her voice soft but steady despite the warning bells that were now clanging like a fire alarm in her mind. "What kind of mistake?" The woman's lips, plumped with filler, curved into a smile that was utterly devoid of warmth. It was a predator's smile. "Well," the woman said, her voice pitched just loud enough for the occupants of the nearby tables to hear, "I couldn't help but notice you sitting here, all alone, and I thought perhaps you were lost." Around them, the gentle hum of elite dinner conversation began to falter. Conversations paused mid-sentence as people sensed the brewing storm. Celeste was acutely aware of the eyes turning in their direction, the subtle shift in the room's energy from relaxed to attentive. The fragile warmth she'd felt moments earlier was rapidly being replaced by a cold, hard knot of dread in the pit of her stomach. This was her nightmare realized. "I'm not lost," Celeste replied calmly, though her hands trembled slightly as she reached for her water glass, the condensation cool against her clammy skin. "I'm having dinner with my husband." The woman's laugh was a sharp, brittle sound, like ice cubes dropped into an empty crystal glass. "Your husband?" She glanced around theatrically, a silent film actress playing to the cheap seats, ensuring she had the full attention of the surrounding tables. "I don't see anyone with you, dear. And frankly," She leaned in conspiratorially, her voice dropping to a stage whisper that still carried. "I'm having a little trouble understanding how someone like you could afford to eat at a place like Spago." The words hit Celeste like a physical blow. Someone like you. The phrase was a loaded gun, packed with centuries of assumption and hatred, wrapped in the deceptively polite, passive-aggressive language of Beverly Hills society. Celeste had encountered this coded language before. The subtle implication that her skin color, her simple clothes, automatically disqualified her from certain spaces, certain levels of success, certain kinds of respect. "My husband stepped away to take a business call," Celeste said, her voice remaining level despite the fury that was beginning to smolder in her chest. "He'll be back shortly." "Oh, how convenient," the woman sneered, her voice dripping with oily sarcasm. "A mysterious phantom husband who's conveniently absent." She leaned closer, her perfume so strong it was suffocating. "Listen, sweetheart, I don't know what kind of game you're playing, but this establishment has standards. People like you don't just wander in here off the street and sit down at premium tables. It makes the other patrons uncomfortable." Heat flooded Celeste's cheeks, a hot tide of shame and anger. "People like you." There it was again, hanging in the air between them like a toxic cloud. Every eye in their section of the restaurant was now fixed on their exchange. Celeste could see the mixture of morbid curiosity, discomfort, and, on a few of the more weathered faces, a flicker of what looked like agreement. "I have every right to be here," Celeste said, her voice gaining a firmness that surprised even her. "Just like anyone else in this room." The woman's perfectly sculpted eyebrows rose in mock surprise. "Rights? Oh, honey, let me explain something to you about rights." She gestured grandly around the elegant dining room with a sweep of her diamond-laden hand. "This isn't some fast food joint where anyone with $20 in their pocket can walk in. This is Spago, Beverly Hills. Do you have any idea what it costs to have a meal here? Do you know who comes here? We have standards to maintain." Celeste's hands clenched into fists in her lap, her nails digging into her palms. She thought of Adrian's words in the car. "You belong everywhere I belong." But sitting here now, facing this woman's venomous attack while her husband was absent, those words felt fragile, like spun glass. "I know exactly where I am," Celeste said quietly. "And I know I have a right to be here." "Rights don't pay for $30 appetizers, darling," the woman snapped, her veneer of politeness finally cracking to reveal the ugly prejudice beneath. "And they certainly don't make you belong in places like this. Just look at yourself." Her cold eyes raked over Celeste's simple navy dress with undisguised contempt. "That dress probably came from a department store. Those shoes," she sneered, glancing at Celeste's comfortable flats, "look like something a waitress would wear. You are completely and utterly out of your league here, and frankly, you're an eyesore." The sheer, unadulterated cruelty in the woman's voice was breathtaking. Celeste felt tears threatening at the corners of her eyes, a hot, stinging sensation, but she blinked them back furiously. She would not cry. She would not give this horrible woman the satisfaction of seeing her break. "My clothes don't determine my worth," Celeste said, surprised by the strength that resonated in her own voice. "And they certainly don't give you the right to judge me or speak to me this way." "Worth?" The woman laughed again, a sound like bones breaking. "Let me tell you about Worth, dear. I am Patricia Hartwell. My husband owns half the commercial real estate in Beverly Hills. We donate more to charity in a single year than you will likely make in your entire lifetime. I know everyone who matters in this city, and I can guarantee you that none of them," she gestured to the silent, watching diners, "would appreciate having their expensive evening disrupted by someone who so clearly doesn't understand proper social boundaries." Patricia Hartwell. The name meant nothing to Celeste, but the way Patricia pronounced it, with a reverence usually reserved for royalty or deities, suggested it should command immediate respect and deference. "I'm not disrupting anyone's evening," Celeste said, her voice starting to tremble despite her best efforts. "I am simply sitting at my table." "No," Patricia said, her voice rising in pitch and volume, drawing even more attention. "You are making everyone uncomfortable. Look around you. Do you see anyone else dressed like they're on their way to a PTA meeting? Do you see anyone else who looks like they belong here as little as you do?" The words were carefully chosen daggers, each one dipped in the poison of classism and racism, and each one found its mark. Celeste felt her carefully constructed confidence crumbling under the relentless assault. She felt herself shrinking back into the scared, angry little girl she'd been growing up in Detroit. The girl who'd learned far too early that there were places she wasn't welcome simply because of the color of her skin and the brand of her shoes. "I think you should leave," Patricia continued, her voice now carrying the full booming authority of someone accustomed to having her commands instantly obeyed. "Before you embarrass yourself any further, this isn't the kind of place where you can just walk in and pretend to be something you're not." "I'm not pretending to be anything," Celeste said, but her voice was weaker now, shaken by the sustained public attack on her dignity. "Oh, please," Patricia said with a dismissive wave of her hand. "We both know what this is. You saw an opportunity to sneak into a fancy restaurant, probably hoping to catch the eye of some wealthy man who might be impressed by your little innocent girl charade. Well, let me save you the trouble, sweetheart. It's not working. Everyone here can see exactly what you are." The words hit Celeste like acid. The vile implication that she was some kind of gold digger, a prostitute trolling for clients, someone trying to trick her way into wealth and status, was so far from the truth it was almost absurd. But the way Patricia said it, with such unshakable conviction and self-righteous authority, made Celeste's world tilt on its axis. "You don't know anything about me," Celeste whispered, the words feeling pitiful and small in the charged air. "I know enough," Patricia replied coldly. "I know you don't belong here. I know you're making my friends and I uncomfortable with your presence. And I know that the longer you sit there, pretending to be something you're not, the more pathetic you look." Patricia leaned closer then, her face a mask of triumphant cruelty, her voice dropping to a venomous whisper that only Celeste could hear, but whose malice seemed to radiate outwards. "Let me make this very simple for you. Get up, leave now, quietly, and maybe you can salvage what's left of your dignity. You keep sitting there, and I will make it my personal mission to ensure that every single person in this restaurant knows exactly what kind of trash you are." The threat hung in the air between them, like a loaded gun pressed to Celeste's temple. She felt trapped, cornered by a predator who seemed to take genuine perverse pleasure in her fear and discomfort. Every instinct screamed at her to stand up and walk away, to flee this waking nightmare before it escalated further. But something deeper, something stronger, a core of resilience forged in the fires of a difficult life, kept her seated. It was the memory of Adrian's words, his faith in her. It was the thought of all the times she had been forced to back down, to make herself smaller, to accept less than she deserved. And it was the simple, undeniable knowledge that she had done nothing wrong. "I'm not leaving," Celeste said, her voice quiet but imbued with a surprising, steely firmness. "I have every right to be here, and I am not going anywhere." Patricia's face flushed a blotchy, angry red. The outright rejection of her authority, the refusal to be cowed, seemed to trigger something primal and violent within her. For a moment, Celeste thought the woman might simply combust with rage, but instead, Patricia's voice rose to a level that ensured every single person in Spago could hear her next words, a shriek that shattered the last vestiges of decorum. "How dare you speak to me that way?" she shrieked, her body trembling with fury. "Do you have any idea who I am? I will not be insulted by some cheap, classless nobody who doesn't even belong in the same zip code as this restaurant. And then, before Celeste could react, before anyone could even think to intervene, Patricia Hartwell's hand flew through the air. The crack of her palm connecting with Celeste's cheek echoed through the now silent dining room like a gunshot, a sound that would change everything, for everyone, forever. The silence that followed the slap was a physical thing, a heavy, suffocating blanket that smothered the entire dining room of Spago. For a heartbeat, the world seemed to freeze, suspended in the horrifying echo of the blow. Celeste's cheek burned with a fire that spread through her entire body, a searing pain that was nothing compared to the deeper, colder wound of public humiliation. Her right hand rose instinctively, her fingers trembling as they touched the hot, stinging skin. The sensation was surreal, as if she were watching this happen to someone else in a movie. She could taste the coppery tang of blood in her mouth, where her teeth had sliced the inside of her lip. A high-pitched whine started in her left ear, muffling the world and making it sound distant and distorted. Around them, the restaurant had become a theater of horrified faces, a gallery of shock. Forks were suspended halfway to mouths, wine glasses held frozen in mid-sip. Every eye was fixed on their table, the expressions ranging from outright horror to a morbid fascination. Patricia Hartwell stood over Celeste like a conquering general, her chest heaving with self-righteous indignation, her blue eyes blazing with a chilling satisfaction. Her perfectly manicured hand was still slightly raised, as if savoring the impact. "There," she said, her voice cutting clearly across the silent room. "Maybe now you'll understand that actions have consequences. You can't just waltz into places where you don't belong and expect to be treated like you matter." Celeste felt tears building behind her eyes, hot and sharp, but she fought them back with a ferocity she didn't know she possessed. Not here. She would not break in front of this woman and all these staring, judging faces. The humiliation was a crushing weight, but beneath it, a new feeling was beginning to stir. A cold, hard rage. "You hit me," Celeste said. Her voice was barely a whisper, but in the absolute silence, it carried the weight of an accusation. The words felt strange, unreal. Speaking them made the assault concrete in a way the physical pain hadn't. "I defended myself," Patricia retorted coldly, callously smoothing down her white Chanel dress as if the act of violence had been a minor inconvenience that might have wrinkled the fabric. "You were becoming aggressive and threatening. Everyone here saw it." The lie was so audacious, so completely divorced from reality, that it sent a new wave of shock through Celeste. Patricia was actively rewriting history, attempting to gaslight not just Celeste, but the entire room, transforming herself from aggressor to victim. "I never threatened you," Celeste said, her voice growing stronger, fueled by the injustice. "I was sitting at my table. You approached me. You harassed me. You attacked me." "Oh, please," Patricia scoffed, turning to address the watching crowd, as if they were a jury she needed to win over. "Did anyone else see how hostile she became when I simply tried to have a polite conversation? The way she raised her voice? I was afraid of what she might do." A few of the nearby diners shifted uncomfortably, their eyes darting between the two women. Celeste could see the social calculus happening behind their eyes as they weighed the evidence. Patricia's expensive clothes, her confident demeanor, her stated social connections versus Celeste's simple dress, her skin color, and her quiet dignity. In this world, the scales were not balanced. She was perfectly polite. A voice cut through the tension. It came from a table near the window. An elderly man with kind, intelligent eyes and a full head of silver hair had spoken, his voice calm but firm. "I saw the whole thing. This young lady never raised her voice nor acted aggressively in any way. You, madam, he said, looking directly at Patricia, were the one who approached her table uninvited and initiated the hostility. Patricia's face flushed a deep, ugly red at being contradicted. I don't know what you think you saw, old man, but this woman was clearly out of line. She doesn't belong here, and everyone in this room knows it. What I know, the elderly man replied, his voice unwavering, is that I just watched you assault someone for no reason other than your own blatant prejudice. A murmur rippled through the diners as the spell of shocked silence finally broke. Celeste could hear fragments of conversation. Did you see that? She actually hit her. Over what? Her dress? That poor girl, she looks terrified. That's Patricia Hartwell. She's always been a nasty piece of work. The last comment made Patricia whip her head around, her eyes scanning the room like a hawk searching for prey. I'll have you know that my family has been a pillar of this community for generations, she announced loudly, her voice shrill. We don't need lectures about proper behavior from people who clearly don't understand the social dynamics at play here. Slowly, deliberately, Celeste rose from her chair. Her legs felt shaky, like a newborn foal's, but her resolve was hardening into steel. The movement drew every eye back to her. She could feel the weight of their collective attention, a physical pressure. Her cheek still burned, a visible brand of Patricia's hatred, but something inside her had irrevocably shifted. The scared little girl from Detroit was gone, burned away in the fire of this humiliation. In her place stood a woman who had survived far too much to be broken by the likes of Patricia Hartwell. Social dynamics? Celeste repeated, her voice clear and strong, resonating with a newfound authority. Is that what you call racism and assault? The word racism electrified the room. Several diners gasped audibly. Patricia's face went from flushed red to a pasty, sickly white in an instant. How dare you? Patricia hissed, her voice a venomous whisper. How dare you play the race card? You're the one who doesn't belong here. This has nothing to do with race and everything to do with class and common decency. You told me people like me don't belong here, Celeste said, her voice growing stronger with each word, each memory of the insult fueling her. You judged me based on my appearance and decided I wasn't worthy of basic human respect. You attacked me because you thought I was alone and powerless to fight back. What would you call that? I would call it reality, Patricia snapped back, her cruelty breathtaking. Some people understand their place in the world, and some people need to be reminded of it. You clearly fall into the second category. The sheer ugliness of the statement seemed to sober even some of the diners who had initially seemed sympathetic to Patricia. The elderly man was now shaking his head in open disgust. Where is the manager? Patricia suddenly demanded, turning away from Celeste to scan the restaurant. I want this woman removed immediately. She's creating a disturbance and making threats against me. As if summoned, a nervous-looking man in a perfectly pressed suit appeared at their table. He was the manager, his face a mask of pale horror at the public scene unfolding in his Michelin-starred establishment. His eyes darted between Patricia's furious face and Celeste's tear-stained one, clearly trying to find the path of least resistance. Mrs. Hartwell, he said carefully, his voice placating. Perhaps we could discuss this matter privately in my office? There is nothing to discuss privately, Patricia replied imperiously. This woman does not belong here, and I want her removed. Now. The manager's eyes flicked to Celeste, taking in her simple dress, her obvious distress, and the angry red mark on her cheek that was already beginning to darken into a bruise. Ma'am, he said gently to Celeste, perhaps I could arrange for you to be seated in a different, more private section of the restaurant. The suggestion felt like a knife twisting in Celeste's heart. Even now, with clear evidence of assault before him, the manager's instinct was to move her, the victim, rather than confront the wealthy, powerful aggressor. The injustice of it made her feel sick. I am not moving, Celeste said firmly. "I was assaulted while sitting peacefully at my table. I have done nothing wrong." "She's being dramatic," Patricia interjected with a sneer. "I barely touched her. I only did it because she was becoming aggressive and making me feel threatened." "The mark on her face suggests otherwise," the elderly man called out from his table. "And I would be more than happy to testify to that fact if necessary." Patricia whirled around to face him again. "No one asked for your opinion, you old fool. This is between me and this con artist who thinks she can trick her way into places she doesn't belong." "Con artist?" Celeste repeated, the word hitting her like another slap. "What exactly do you think I'm trying to con?" "Please," Patricia said with a dismissive, ugly laugh. "The mysterious husband who's conveniently absent. The sob story about belonging here. We all know what this is. You're probably hoping to seduce some wealthy man, or maybe you're planning to sue the restaurant for some imagined slight. Either way, your pathetic little scheme isn't going to work." The accusation was so outrageous, so vile, that Celeste's anger finally burned through her shock and pain. This woman had not only physically assaulted her, but was now assassinating her character in front of a room full of strangers. "You don't know the first thing about me," Celeste said, her voice ringing with an authority that surprised even her. "You made assumptions based on your own prejudice and ignorance, and when I refused to submit to your bullying, you resorted to violence. That says everything about your character, Mrs. Hartwell, and absolutely nothing about mine." Patricia's face contorted with pure rage. "Character? Don't you dare lecture me about character when you're sitting here playing dress-up in a restaurant you could never afford, spinning lies about husbands who don't exist." It was at that exact moment, as Patricia's voice reached its peak of vicious triumph, that the soft murmur of the crowd stopped entirely. A new, deeper silence fell over the room. Celeste saw Patricia's eyes widen slightly as she registered something behind Celeste's shoulder. A collective shift in the room's energy, a sudden drop in temperature. When Celeste turned to see what had captured everyone's attention, her heart nearly stopped. Adrian was walking toward their table. His face was a mask of controlled fury so terrifying that Celeste had never seen anything like it before. His green eyes were locked on Patricia Hartwell with an intensity that made several nearby diners instinctively lean away as he passed. Every step he took seemed to charge the air with electricity. The charming, relaxed man from their bedroom was gone, replaced by a predator. Patricia, however, tragically misread the situation. A smug smile of vindication spread across her face as she assumed he was the manager, or perhaps another powerful patron coming to support her position. "Thank God," Patricia said loudly, for all to hear. "Finally, someone with some authority. Sir, please tell this woman that she needs to leave immediately. She's been causing nothing but trouble since the moment she arrived." Adrian stopped directly beside Celeste, his eyes never leaving Patricia's face. When he finally spoke, his voice was quiet, almost a whisper, but it carried such a weight of menace that it seemed to echo off the walls. "Did you just put your hands on my wife?" The words hung in the air like a thunderclap. Patricia Hartwell's triumphant smile froze, then slowly, agonizingly, melted away as the meaning of Adrian's words seeped into her consciousness. Her mouth opened and closed soundlessly, like a fish gasping for air. Her eyes, wide with dawning horror, darted between Adrian's imposing, furious figure and Celeste's tear-streaked face. Your wife?" Patricia stammered, her voice a strangled whisper. The color drained from her face so rapidly that her expertly applied makeup stood out like garish war paint against her suddenly pale skin. Adrian stepped closer to Celeste, his hand moving to rest protectively on her shoulder. The gesture was infinitely gentle toward his wife, but his eyes remained fixed on Patricia with the cold, deadly intensity of a hunter studying its cornered prey. "My wife," Adrian repeated, his voice gaining volume and a steely edge with each syllable. "Celeste Williams, the woman you just assaulted in front of an entire room full of witnesses." A collective gasp swept through the dining room. Whispers exploded like popcorn as the cataclysmic magnitude of Patricia's mistake began to register. People were openly pulling out their phones now, some frantically Googling Adrian's name, others texting with furious speed. "Adrian Williams," someone whispered loudly from a nearby table. "Oh my God, that's Adrian Williams from Nexus Innovations." "The tech billionaire," another voice replied in a shocked hiss. "She hit a billionaire's wife." Patricia's legs seemed to buckle, and she gripped the back of a nearby chair for support. I didn't know," she whispered, then immediately seemed to realize how damning that sounded. "I mean, she didn't look like..." "Like what?" Adrian's voice cut through her, stammering like a shard of glass. He moved slightly, positioning himself more fully between Patricia and Celeste, a human shield radiating barely contained violence. "She didn't look like she deserved basic human respect? She didn't look like she belonged in the same room as you?" Every word Adrian spoke landed on Patricia like a physical blow. She flinched, her eyes darting around the restaurant as if searching for an escape route that did not exist. Every face was now a juror in the trial of her public demolition. The restaurant manager, who had been frozen in abject horror since Adrian's arrival, suddenly snapped into action, scurrying toward them. "Mr. Williams," he said, his voice trembling, "I am so terribly sorry. If I had known Mrs. Williams was your wife, this never would have... If you had known?" Adrian turned his arctic gaze on the manager, and the man physically recoiled. "Are you suggesting that my wife deserved to be treated this way because you didn't recognize her? That assault is acceptable in your establishment as long as the victim isn't married to a wealthy man?" "No, sir. Absolutely not, sir," the manager babbled, sweat beading on his forehead. "I meant no disrespect. We have the highest regard for all our guests." "Clearly not all your guests," Adrian said coldly, his hand moving to gently cup Celeste's cheek, his thumb brushing over the angry red mark. The tender gesture, so at odds with the fury in his eyes, made several women in the dining room audibly sigh. Patricia found her voice again, though it was a desperate, croaking sound. "I had no idea who she was. She was dressed so casually. How was I supposed to know?" The words were perhaps the worst possible thing she could have said. Adrian's eyes, which had been cold before, now turned to absolute ice. "So you admit it," he said, his voice dropping to a dangerously quiet level. "You judged my wife based on her appearance. You decided that because she wasn't wearing expensive enough clothes, she didn't deserve your respect. You thought that because she chose to dress modestly, she was somehow less worthy of basic human dignity." "That's not what I meant," Patricia said desperately, but her voice lacked any conviction. Everyone in the room could see the lie. "Then what did you mean?" Adrian pressed. "Explain to me, Mrs. Hartwell, exactly what gave you the right to approach my wife, berate her, humiliate her in public, and then put your hands on her." The use of her name seemed to shock Patricia even further. The realization that he knew exactly who she was added another layer of terror to her panic. We've never been introduced," she said weakly. "How do you know my name?" "I make it my business to know everyone who matters in this city," Adrian replied, his voice flat and chilling. "And more importantly, I make it my business to know everyone who might pose a threat to my family. Your husband is Gregory Hartwell, of Hartwell Properties. Your family has significant real estate holdings throughout Beverly Hills. You sit on the board of 3 different charities and consider yourself a pillar of this community." Each fact Adrian recited seemed to drain more life from Patricia's face. He wasn't just a powerful man. He was an informed, strategic one. You also, Adrian continued, his voice hardening, have a reputation for precisely this kind of behavior. This isn't the first time you've used your perceived social status to bully people you consider beneath you. But I promise you, Mrs. Hartwell, it is going to be the last. The threat was unmistakable, and Patricia seemed to shrink under the weight of it. Please, she whispered, her voice breaking as tears began to stream down her face, carving black streaks through her expensive makeup. I made a mistake. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to. You didn't mean to get caught, Adrian corrected her. You didn't mean to discover that your victim had the power to fight back, but you absolutely meant to humiliate and degrade a person you thought was powerless. Celeste watched the exchange, a maelstrom of emotions swirling inside her. She had never seen this side of her husband, had never witnessed the full, terrifying force of his power directed at another human being. It was both breathtaking and frightening. Adrian, she said softly, placing a hand on his tense arm. Maybe we should... No, Adrian said firmly, but his voice gentled instantly when he looked down at her. You were assaulted, Celeste, in public, by someone who thought you were an easy target. That is not something we are going to quietly ignore. He turned his merciless gaze back to Patricia. Mrs. Hartwell, you have exactly one opportunity to explain yourself. Why did you think it was acceptable to put your hands on my wife? Patricia's mouth worked for several seconds before any sound came out. She didn't look like she belonged here, she finally choked out. I assumed... You assumed that gave you the right to assault her, Adrian finished coldly. I barely touched her, Patricia pleaded, the words sounding pathetic even to her own ears. The mark on her face and the sound of the slap that echoed through this entire restaurant suggests otherwise. The elderly man called out again from his table, his voice a clear note of truth in the toxic air. And I, for one, would be happy to testify to exactly what I witnessed should legal action be pursued. The mention of legal action hit Patricia like a physical blow. She swayed on her feet, her knuckles white as she gripped the chair to keep from collapsing. Legal action, she whispered in horror. You can't. Surely we can work this out privately. Between civilized people? Civilized people, Adrian replied, his voice dripping with contempt. Don't assault others in restaurants. Civilized people don't judge others based on their clothing or their skin color. Civilized people don't assume that wealth gives them the right to treat others as less than human. The dining room remained a frozen tableau, every eye fixed on the confrontation. Cell phones were now openly recording, their small red lights like malevolent eyes blinking in the dim light. Celeste realized with a jolt that this scene would be all over social media within hours. The thought should have horrified her, but instead she felt a strange, grim sense of satisfaction. Let the world see. Let them all see what Patricia Hartwell really was. What would you do if you witnessed someone being treated this way? Have you ever had to stand up to a bully? Share your thoughts in the comments, and make sure you like this video if you believe every single person deserves respect, regardless of what they wear or where they come from. Please, Patricia begged, her voice now completely broken, her words a desperate, jumbled mess. My husband, my family, our reputation. If this gets out... You should have thought about your family, Adrian replied without an ounce of mercy, before you decided to assault mine. The confrontation was far from over, and Patricia Hartwell was about to learn that some mistakes carry a price that no amount of money or social status can ever pay. Adrian's voice, though quiet, resonated with an absolute finality that seemed to suck the remaining air from Patricia Hartwell's lungs. She stared at him, her face a mask of terror, as she began to comprehend the full, devastating scope of her miscalculation. You don't understand, she pleaded, her tears flowing freely now, creating dark, chaotic rivers of mascara down her cheeks. This will destroy us. It will destroy everything my family has worked for. My husband's business relationships, our standing in the community, our children's futures. Please, there has to be another way. Adrian's expression remained as unyielding as granite. Did you consider my wife's feelings when you decided to humiliate her? Did you think about the consequences for her when you raised your hand to strike her? As Patricia continued to dissolve into a puddle of self-pity and terror, Celeste found herself studying her husband's face. She had seen him command boardrooms full of powerful executives, had watched him negotiate billion-dollar deals with cold, calculating precision. But this was different. This was raw. This was personal. The protective fury radiating from him was a force of nature, an elemental power she had never witnessed unleashed before. Celeste, Adrian said softly, his voice a stark contrast to the storm in his eyes. He never took his gaze off Patricia, as if afraid she might lash out again. I want you to tell everyone here exactly what happened, from the very beginning. Let them hear it in your words. Celeste took a shaky breath, her hand instinctively rising to touch the tender, throbbing spot on her cheek. The initial sting had dulled to a deep, constant ache, but the humiliation still burned fresh and raw. I was sitting at our table, she began, her voice quiet but clear in the tomb-like silence of the restaurant. Waiting for Adrian to finish his phone call, Mrs. Hartwell approached me and said there had been some kind of mistake. She could feel every eye on her, every ear straining to listen. She met the gaze of the elderly man who had defended her, and he gave her a small, encouraging nod. She told me I was lost, Celeste continued, her voice growing stronger as the righteous anger began to eclipse the pain. She said that people like me don't belong in places like this. She said I couldn't afford to eat here. She mocked my clothes, calling them cheap. She said I was playing some kind of game, pretending to be something I wasn't. Patricia's face crumpled further with each word Celeste spoke, each sentence another nail in her social coffin. I didn't mean it like that, she whispered weakly, but the protest was pathetic and hollow. When I told her I was waiting for my husband, she laughed and said he was a convenient fiction, Celeste said, her eyes meeting Patricia's directly. She told me I was trying to con someone. She said I was either looking for a wealthy man to seduce or planning to sue the restaurant. She called me pathetic and told me to leave before I embarrassed myself further. A collective intake of breath swept through the room. Even those who hadn't heard the initial confrontation were beginning to understand the depth of Patricia's unprovoked cruelty. And when I refused to leave, Celeste's voice was steady now, unwavering. When I told her I had every right to be here, she became furious. She started screaming about how dare I speak to her that way, about knowing my place. And then she hit me. The simple, factual recounting of events was more powerful than any dramatic embellishment could have been. The ugly truth, laid bare for all to see, was undeniable. Adrian moved closer, his hand finding hers and squeezing it gently, a silent transfer of strength. What my wife isn't telling you, he said, his voice carrying easily through the restaurant, is that this kind of treatment isn't new to her. She has faced this kind of prejudice and these kinds of assumptions her entire life. Celeste looked up at her husband, surprised. They had talked about her past, of course, in the quiet intimacy of their life together, but he had never spoken of it publicly. She saw a decision solidifying in his expression, a resolve to use their story as both a shield and a sword. My wife grew up in Detroit, Adrian said, his voice filled with a fierce pride and a profound love that stood in stark contrast to the fury still simmering beneath the surface. Her mother was a nurse who worked double shifts to keep food on the table after her father, a firefighter, died in the line of duty when Celeste was just 8 years old. Celeste herself started working at the age of 14, bagging groceries, to help support her family, all while maintaining straight A's in school. Patricia's sobbing had quieted as she listened, a horrified understanding dawning on her face as she realized just how catastrophically she had misjudged her victim. She put herself through Wayne State University, Adrian continued, his voice resonating with admiration. Working nights at a Greasy Spoon diner and weekends at a laundromat. She graduated summa cum laude with a degree in education and dedicated her life to helping underprivileged children learn to read. When I met her 3 years ago, she was making $28,000 a year and donating half of her vacation time to volunteer in inner-city literacy programs. The picture Adrian was painting stood in such sharp, stunning contrast to Patricia's vile accusations that several diners were now openly shaking their heads in disgust. The woman Patricia had dismissed as a cheap, classless gold digger was being revealed as a person of immense character, dedication, and grace. "She has never once asked me for anything," Adrian said, his voice softening with emotion but losing none of its intensity. "When I proposed to her, she insisted on keeping her teaching job for 6 more months because she refused to abandon her students mid-semester. When we got married, she donated her entire modest wardrobe to a women's shelter because she said, 'Other people need these clothes more than I do.'" Celeste felt tears welling up in her own eyes. But these were not tears of humiliation. They were tears of overwhelming love and gratitude for a husband who saw her so clearly, who valued her for who she was, not what she wore. "This dress she's wearing tonight?" Adrian gestured toward Celeste's simple navy outfit. "She chose it because it's comfortable, because it makes her feel like herself. She has a closet the size of a small apartment filled with designer gowns that I've bought for her, gowns she rarely wears, because she would rather I donate the money to one of her charities. She is a woman who would rather spend $1,000 feeding hungry families than buying a new handbag." Patricia's legs finally gave out completely, and she sank into the chair she had been gripping, her body collapsing as if her bones had turned to dust. Her perfect, cruel facade had completely crumbled, leaving behind a broken, pathetic woman who was finally, tragically, beginning to understand the true cost of her actions. "Mrs. Hartwell," Adrian said, his attention turning back to her, his voice devoid of any pity. "You judged my wife based on her skin color and her clothes. You decided that because she didn't look wealthy enough for your standards, she was unworthy of basic human respect. You assaulted her because you thought she was powerless." "I'm sorry," Patricia whispered, the words barely audible. "I am so sorry. I didn't know." "You didn't know that she was married to someone who could destroy you?" Adrian asked coldly. "Or you didn't know that she was a human being who deserved better treatment regardless of her circumstances?" The distinction was brutal in its clarity, and Patricia had no answer. 3 years ago," Adrian continued, his voice taking on a different, more intimate tone, as if he were sharing a secret with the entire room. "I was sitting in a small coffee shop in Westwood, completely burned out from work, questioning whether anything I was building actually mattered in the world. I overheard a conversation between my wife, a complete stranger to me then, and a barista about literacy rates in low-income communities. Celeste was so passionate, so knowledgeable, so completely on fire with her desire to make a difference that I found myself captivated." A small, sad smile played at the corners of Adrian's mouth as he recalled the memory. She was wearing a $15 dress from Target and shoes that had clearly been resoled more than once, and she was the most beautiful woman I had ever seen. But more than that, she was real in a way I had never encountered in my world of superficiality. When I finally worked up the courage to introduce myself, she spent 20 minutes telling me about her students' latest achievements before she even thought to ask me what I did for a living. The love in Adrian's voice was a tangible thing, and Celeste felt her heart swell with an emotion so powerful it almost hurt. When she eventually found out that I was worth more money than she could possibly imagine, Adrian continued, her very first question to me wasn't about my house or my cars or my lifestyle. She asked if Nexus Innovations had a philanthropic arm, and if I would consider funding a new, nationwide literacy program for at-risk children. She cared more about my potential to help others than my ability to provide for her. Patricia was weeping openly now, her hands covering her face as the full, devastating weight of her mistake crashed down upon her. Around them, other diners were quietly wiping away tears of their own, moved by the raw, beautiful honesty of the story Adrian was sharing. "That," Adrian said, his voice hardening again as he looked directly at Patricia Hartwell's bowed head, "is the woman you just assaulted. That is the person you decided wasn't worthy of your respect. And now, Mrs. Hartwell, you are going to learn, in no uncertain terms, what happens when someone attacks my family." The promise of consequences hung in the air like gathering storm clouds. The room was silent, waiting for the lightning to strike. Patricia Hartwell was about to discover that her nightmare was only just beginning.